My name is Irena, and I'd like to tell you about something that happened to me, about how I inherited everything from my grandfather, while my perfect sister Selena, the family's golden child, received only a fraction. It wasn't about money or spite, it was about showing up quietly when it mattered most. The envelope was thick and cream-colored with raised lettering that spelled out Thorn and Vale Attorneys at Law. My name sat just below in black ink, Miss Iriana Reyeson, a font too elegant to belong to anything casual. I held it for a moment before opening it, already knowing what it was. Not because anyone had told me, but because I'd felt something shift the morning Grandpa passed. Like the hinge on an old door finally giving way. At breakfast, my mother had said it with her usual clipped certainty. Grayson's will is being read next week. It's formal, of course, but Selena is the primary beneficiary. You don't need to dress up for disappointment. I didn't respond. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with her was like tossing words down a well. They never echoed back. The letter confirmed what she said. There would be a reading. Attendance was requested. I ran my finger over the date and time. One line stood out. You have been named among the interested parties. I set the letter down beside my coffee, steam curling quietly between the lines. I could already hear my father's voice in my head. Don't embarrass yourself by showing up for something you were never part of. They never meant to be cruel, at least not directly. But sometimes the absence of belief stings sharper than any insult. I wasn't the star. I wasn't Selena. I had never been. And yet I thought about Grandpa's porch, about the way he'd once placed an old book in my lap and said, "The ones who sit with you in silence, those are the ones who stay." It wasn't about inheritance. Not really. I didn't expect money or recognition or even acknowledgement. But still, I folded the letter neatly, placed it into my coat pocket, and circled the date on my calendar. Maybe I wasn't supposed to matter in the room, but I was going to be in it when we were kids. Selena's name echoed through every hallway in our house like it was stitched into the wallpaper. Selena got first chair in orchestra. Selena's teacher says she's gifted. Selena's audition went perfectly. Our parents talked about her like she was already someone important, as if everything she touched turned to something shiny and valuable. I never resented her. Not really. I just learned to live in the spaces between her spotlight. While she stood on stages and posed for pictures, I found quiet corners, the back steps with a book, the garage with Grandpa's old puzzle boxes. Our mother once caught me reading at the dinner table and said, "Why don't you try joining the world for once?" I did, but it never stuck. I wasn't loud enough, not impressive enough, not Selena enough. Grandpa was the only one who didn't ask me to be louder. He'd pass me small gifts, an old pocket compass, a cracked globe, a map of trails he never got around to hiking. "See where this takes you," he'd say, and I'd spend afternoons tracing lines through places I'd never been, feeling like maybe he understood the way my mind wandered. He never said I was special. He never had to. The last time I saw him was a Sunday in early October. I brought him a tin of tea I'd found in a little shop downtown, the kind with bergamot and dried orange peel. He made 2 mugs without asking what I wanted. We sat on his porch while the leaves blew across the yard, both of us quiet in that easy way people can be when nothing needs to be fixed. No one knew about that visit. There were no photos, no announcements. He didn't tell me about the will. He didn't tell me anything at all, really. But as I left, he squeezed my hand and said, "You always show up without needing to be seen. That's rarer than you think." It stayed with me, not because it was praise, but because it felt like permission. Permission to keep showing up the way I was, even if no one else noticed. Now, as I laid out a plain black dress across my bed and packed a coat with missing buttons, I didn't feel prepared or important. I didn't feel like an heir to anything, but something deeper nudged at me. Not entitlement, just a quiet sense that I needed to be in that room. Not for them, not even for me. For him, the chapel sat at the top of a small hill, its stone walls soaked in early frost. I arrived just before the service started, in a plain wool coat that still held the scent of cedar from my closet. The wind bit at my hands as I stepped. Inside, shaking the cold from my sleeves, Selena was already there, wrapped in sleek black silk, her heels impossibly high for winter. People moved around her like she was the widow instead of the granddaughter. She didn't see me at first, or pretended not to. I nodded to the usher. "I'm here for Grayson Reyes." He hesitated a moment too long, then pointed to the side aisle. "You can sit there." The pews were mostly filled with faces I recognized from a distance. Old neighbors, family friends, people from the firm. My parents sat in the second row, Selena next to them, leaning in as my mother whispered something into her ear. I found a seat near the back. No one joined me. Someone behind me muttered, "Why is she here?" Another replied, "I thought she cut ties years ago." I didn't turn around. The murmurs passed over me like wind through trees, sharp but familiar. The urn sat at the front, small and dark, nothing like the man I remembered. Next to it was a photograph of Grandpa from years ago, standing in front of the cabin in his work gloves, smiling like he wasn't supposed to. They played a hymn I didn't know. The pastor spoke of legacies and faith, but my eyes stayed fixed on the photograph. I thought of that quiet porch afternoon, the one no one knew about, the one that hadn't needed explaining. Grief is a strange thing. After the service, we gathered at the law office for the reading. Selena walked in like she owned the place, her coat draped over her arm, a small clutch swinging from her wrist. "This is just formality," she said loud enough for me to hear. Grandpa knew who deserved what. Our parents settled beside her. My mother had the same tight-lipped look she wore at weddings and court hearings, equal parts pride and performance. I didn't sit near them. I took the chair closest to the window, away from the cluster. Mr. Thorne entered with a file tucked beneath his arm. He greeted the room with a quiet nod before taking his seat. "Thank you all for coming. I'll begin with the official reading of Grayson Reyes's will, dated June 12th of last year." Selena crossed her legs and tilted her chin upward like she already knew what came next. "To my granddaughter Selena Reyes," Mr. Thorne read, "I leave the Aspen Chalet, all furnishings therein, and the sum of $300,000 to be dispersed within 60 days of probate." Selena's smile widened, but not from surprise. She glanced at my parents, who each gave her the kind of small nod reserved for people fulfilling expectations. Mr. Thorne paused to turn the page. There was a subtle shift in the air, almost imperceptible, like the room exhaled and held its breath all at once. Selena turned toward me slightly, her smirk still soft around the edges. My mother didn't look at me at all. No one said anything, but it was clear what they believed. That was the end. My name wouldn't be called. I had been acknowledged by invitation only, just enough to stay on the right side of legal courtesy. Folded my hands in my lap and waited. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat again to eat Aina Regis. The words settled on the table like dust soft but undeniable. My pulse jumped, but I didn't move. He adjusted his glasses and continued reading, and just like that, the air in the room began to change. Mr. Thorne's voice was steady, almost too steady. "To my granddaughter, Irena Reyes," he said, "I leave controlling interest in Reyes development, along with $53.5 million in personal and investment assets." The words didn't land right away. They hung in the air, suspended, waiting for someone to claim them as real. The silence in the room stretched thin. "What?" Selena said, like she hadn't heard correctly. My mother made a small choking sound. My father sat back as if something heavy had just slammed into his chest. No one looked at me. Mr. Thorne kept reading, unshaken. "This includes 62% ownership of all corporate entities, voting authority on the board of directors, and full discretion. Regarding future leadership and asset allocation." Selena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood. "There has to be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mr. Thorne said calmly. "Your grandfather made these updates in person, witnessed and notarized. He was of entirely sound mind." My hands were still folded. I hadn't moved. My heart was thudding against my ribs like it was trying to outrun what I'd just heard. "He never said anything," Selena snapped. "He never even liked her. He barely mentioned her." Mr. Thorne closed the file gently. He left a brief addendum for the family to hear. He looked down and read one final sentence, this time without legal cadence, only quiet intention. She was the only one who showed up without a camera. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was heavier, pressed down with the weight of something none of them had expected: clarity. Selena looked stunned. No fury yet, just disbelief. My mother's mouth had dropped slightly open. Her expression caught somewhere between denial and insult. My father looked at me for the first time in years. His gaze didn't soften, it just held. I wasn't thinking about the money, not the company, not even the power. I was thinking about Grandpa's porch and that old book, and the way he never rushed my silence. I was thinking about the Sunday I never shared with anyone because I hadn't needed to. Selena finally spoke again. "This isn't fair." I looked at her, calm and level. "It wasn't meant to be." Mr. Thorne stood, gathering the documents. "There is one more item Grayson requested. I share a personal letter. It's addressed to you, Irena." He handed me a sealed envelope, the handwriting instantly familiar. I slipped it into my coat pocket, unsure if I was ready to open it, but knowing I would just nod in front of them, I waited until I was alone. Not just away from the office, but back in the small motel room I checked into the night before. Where the heater rattled and the curtains didn't quite meet in the middle, I sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in my lap, turning it over once, twice. His handwriting was steady. I traced the capital I in my name before finally breaking. The seal dot inside were 3 folded pages. No date, no dear, just my name followed by his words. Irina, you never asked for anything, but you gave me something none of them could time without agenda. I watched you grow up in the quiet corners of a house too loud to hear you. They measured love in applause. You measured it in presence. That Sunday, you came no speech, no performance. You just brought tea and sat with me. No one else knew, and you never told them. That told me everything. I paused, breath catching. The air in the room felt thinner somehow, as if he were there again, just watching, not expecting anything back. I changed my will the next week. Not out of spite. I love Selena too, in my way, but she never stayed unless there was a lens pointed at her. She memorized every part of my legacy except the part that mattered, the time it took to build it. You asked me once why I kept all those maps and journals. You didn't laugh when I said I liked knowing where things had been, so I could better guess where they might be going. I smiled without meaning to. He had said that. I remembered thinking how strange it was that someone so practical still believed in direction without guarantees. I don't care what you do with the company. Keep it, sell it, change its name. What I'm leaving you isn't concrete, it's trust. Trust that someone who shows up quietly without needing to be seen is exactly the kind of person who should be holding the light when everyone else forgets where the switch is. The last sentence was written more slowly, the loops wider, the lines slightly tilted. They'll tell you that you don't deserve it. But I've seen what the world rewards and I've seen what it forgets. I'm choosing to remember you. Love, Grandpa. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease with the side of my hand. Then I placed it back in the envelope and slid it under my pillow. It wasn't validation I felt. It was recognition, soft and firm, like the ground under your feet after you thought you'd been walking on glass. I returned to the office the next morning for the final paperwork. Mr. Thorne had asked me to come alone. When I stepped through the door, they were already there, my parents and Selena, seated stiffly in the waiting area, like they were posing for a portrait they hadn't agreed to. Selena stood as soon as she saw me. You manipulated him, she said, each word sharp and controlled like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. He was old. He didn't know what he was doing. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. Makeup flawless, blouse pressed, grief ironed into outrage. I didn't need to prove anything. I said, I just loved him. Her face twisted. Don't you dare make this about love. He was my grandfather too. I nodded. Then you must have known he didn't care for cameras. My mother flinched. My father looked at the ground. Mr. Thorne stepped into the doorway, his voice steady. Mr. Reyes underwent 2 independent mental evaluations before he amended his will. Both confirmed full competency. His instructions were deliberate and detailed. That doesn't mean it's right, Selena snapped. No, I said. It just means it was his choice. My mother broke then. Not loudly, not all at once, but the tears started and she turned her face away from all of us. My father put a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't reach for it. Selena gathered her things with clipped movements. This isn't over, she said, but her voice had lost its center. You don't get to rewrite the family just because he's gone. I didn't answer. There was nothing else I needed to say. She walked out, heels echoing sharply down the hall. Mr. Thorne gave me a soft nod, gesturing toward the office. Just a few signatures, I followed him inside. The envelope still tucked against my chest. I hadn't let go of it since last night. Whatever storm had passed, I was still here, not untouched, but unshaken. The drive to the cabin took just under 2 hours. Snow flurried along the shoulders of the road, the kind that never quite stuck but whispered that winter was waiting. I hadn't been here in over a decade, but the turns came back to me like muscle memory. The tall evergreens, the sag in the old mailbox, the gravel that popped under the tires as I pulled up the narrow drive. The key turned without resistance. Inside, everything was as he'd left it: the pine table, the faded armchair with the thread blanket, the row of books along the shelf that always leaned slightly left. Dust had settled, but nothing had changed. On the mantel above the cold hearth stood a single photograph. I stopped when I saw it. Me, age 10, legs crossed on the porch step, reading with my back against Grandpa's knee. His hand rested on my shoulder, and we were both looking down at the same page. I didn't even know the picture existed. Beside it sat a small leather-bound journal. I picked it up carefully and flipped open the first page. His handwriting was slightly angled, deliberate. Irina was never loud. That's how I knew I could trust her. The breath left me like I'd been holding it for years. I sat in the armchair, the journal in my lap, and let the silence fill the room, not heavy, but whole. After a while, I stood, added a few logs to the fireplace, and struck a match. The first flame caught, then spread slow and sure. I watched it take shape, listened to the wood settle, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I didn't feel like I had to explain anything to anyone. The room warmed, the edges softened. I stayed there for a long time, until the light glowed steady across the floor and I could feel the weight of the letter, the photograph, and everything I'd inherited not as a burden, but as a beginning.